Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Taklai and I'm here today to reflect on some of the major news that have been coming out of Tigray and Ethiopia the past couple of days, and especially the one to do with suspension of humanitarian aid to Tigray and other parts of Ethiopia by USAID and also the UN body WFP. Um, I think most of you will have read on the news about the decision both by USAID and WFP to suspend the delivery of humanitarian aid to desperately hungry people in Tigray. But as I said before, to other parts of Ethiopia as well. They the reason they gave for why they have been forced to suspend humanitarian aid um, is that there has been a massive scale theft and misappropriation of aid by Ethiopian regime officials at various levels, including apparently at the very top. And on the surface, that would seem to be a fair point for them to make. They have a duty to make sure that taxpayer money doesn't end up in the wrong hands. And if Ethiopian regime officials have indeed um, been doing what they say they have been doing, then of course they would be reluctantly forced to halt operations. So I think that is something that everybody will understand. I think where there is a problem, and that is the point that I really want to make, is humanitarian theft or mishandling of aid or um, misappropriation of aid in Ethiopia is not a new thing. And in fact, anyone who has been following developments the past 3 years, especially in relation to the Tigray war, we know that humanitarian organizations based in Ethiopia have been used in one way or another, by the regime as weapons. And we have been trying for the past 3 years to make that point. And for the most part, to my utter disdain, I have to say, we have been ignored. We have been ignored when we said, for instance, that the director of WFP was a close friend of Abiy, um, David Beasley, I think his name is. And actually, in the report, in the Washington Post report about the suspension of humanitarian aid and the reason given by the US officials, the reporter mentions how David Beasley has been a close ally of Abiy due to the evangelism and other reasons. But anyway, the point, I'm not really interested in his personal closeness to Abiy, but he has been used by Abiy as an important tool against Tigray. When humanitarian workers in Tigray were murdered, didn't say a word. When a convoy carrying aid was targeted, it didn't say a word. When the Ethiopian regime blocked all roads to Tigray, there are 15 roads that lead to Tigray from various parts of Ethiopia. But when the Ethiopian regime continued saying that there was no road open to Tigray because of war, that was a lie that everybody knew was a lie. But no humanitarian worker in Ethiopia has bothered to say that the Ethiopian regime was actually lying. And whether that is WFP staff in Addis Ababa, whether that is USAID staff, whether that is other humanitarian organizations, staffers in Addis, issued statement after statement in favor of the Ethiopian regime, Nobody said anything, and Tigrayans were really, really crying on social media and on conventional media and every outlet that they could find. That humanitarian organizations in Ethiopia were being used as weapons against Tigray. So for USAID and WFP to now all of a sudden hold operations on grounds that humanitarian theft has occurred is it would smack of hypocrisy, because they should have known that that was the norm, and the time to act wasn't now, but in 2020, when it was very, very clear that the Ethiopian regime was going to use them as weapons in one way or another. And so that, I think that is a very, very important point to make. That the reason various Ethiopian regime officials have been able to successfully misappropriate aid or steal aid or mishandle aid or obstruct aid was because they knew they had friends, whether that is at USAID or WFP and the other bodies. They knew that they had allies there, and they knew that they could get away with anything. That was the reason. If USAID and WFP had acted much, much earlier when we flagged the problem, then we wouldn't be where we are now, where Tigrayan children are having to have to suffer for the incompetence of WFP and USAID, and of course for the cruelty of the Ethiopian regime. And for those of you who want to know the details of how the Ethiopian regime weaponized humanitarian organizations, I would strongly recommend you to read a thorough and comprehensive report produced last week by Yale University Law School. I got the name wrong. And I think that the title of the report, I should have it somewhere in my note. Yeah, the title of the report is "Ethiopia is Responsible for Mass Starvation in Tigray." So they, based on information publicly available, they conclude that the starvation has been used as a method of war. Of course, to those of us who have been following Tigray war for the past 2 years, it doesn't come as a surprise, because that is the exact point that we have been making. The Ethiopian regime was using starvation as a weapon, and the reason it was successful was because humanitarian workers based in Ethiopia, like WFP, like USAID, were willy-nilly participating in that cruel enterprise by the Ethiopian regime. But anyway, if you really want to understand how the Ethiopian regime was successful in co-opting the services of whether that is David Beasley or the head of the Ethiopian branch of USAID and other bodies, I strongly recommend you to read that report. I think the title of the report, maybe I'm wrong, at least part of the title is "Ethiopia Responsible for Mass Starvation in Tigray," but I think that is not the full. Maybe let me. Yeah, so Yale Law School. It was published on June 6, 2023, and the title is "Lowenstein Clinic Finds Ethiopia and Allies." And by allies, they mean Amhara forces and Eritrean forces, and allies responsible for mass starvation in Tigray. It's, I think, 140-page report. It's very, very comprehensive. It's very, very thorough. It's very, very detailed, well-resourced, well-referenced, and they also provide legal analysis of what using starvation as a weapon means and all that. So for those of you who are interested in seeing the phenomenon from a legal perspective as well, I strongly recommend you to read. But for now, the point I'm trying to make is that they detail how humanitarian bodies were used as weapons by the Ethiopian regime, and it would defy belief to say that either WFP or USAID were not aware of what was happening. They knew what was happening. They knew that the Ethiopian regime was using them as weapons, and they were they were more than all right to be used in that manner, and that makes you wonder why it is that all of a sudden now they are crying foul, because they should have known that this was always going to happen. They should have known that the officials based in Ethiopia were fundamentally compromised. They should have known that they were being used as stooges by the regime. And they should have known that it was always going to be a matter of time before the Ethiopian officials at various levels were going to mismanage and misappropriate and steal aid in the way that they accuse them of having done. So I think there was a sheer hypocrisy in that, and willful ignorance also, I have to say. So that would be the first point. But the second point is, even granting the accusation they are making, even granting that they had not known that this was happening, even granting that this came as a surprise to them and that they were forced to make a decision, a painful decision, as they say, one has to ask, or one has to raise the moral question, which is that, is it right to punish Tigrayan children, desperately hungry Tigrayan children, because of what regime officials have done? Rather than suspending aid, shouldn't the right thing to do be to find alternative ways of delivering aid to Tigrayan children? How is it ever justifiable to deny Tigrayan children of even one meal per day because of corrupt officials at the top? There is no way one could justify that. So the second recourse shouldn't have been to suspend aid. The recourse, after they found out that aid was being stolen by Ethiopian regime officials, the option that should have come to their mind immediately was, how do we find a way to make sure that aid continues getting into those in desperate need, Tigrayan children. Tigrayan children whose parents haven't had the opportunity to farm, to produce food, and who have been, because of the cruelty of the Ethiopian regime and because of the negligence of the international community to call out the Ethiopian regime, because of various other reasons, Tigrayan households, Tigrayan farmers, Tigrayan people have been made to have no other option but be reliant on aid. So you enable a condition, a situation where people have no other option but wait for aid, and then to suspend that aid is for me, that is the ultimate definition of cruelty. And how and why the humanitarian bodies thought that was ever a morally defensible decision to make, I will never know. And if anybody from WFP or USAID was listening to me, that would be the question. Could you justify to yourself what you have done to suspend aid to grandchildren because Ethiopians, with the collaboration of your own staffers in Addis, have misappropriated aid? And the third point, and this would be my final point, is something that I think is sort of unique to Ethiopia, which is that the Ethiopian regime wouldn't be entirely displeased with the decision of WFP and USAID, because the reason it was ever okay, it was ever all right to let aid trickle into Tigray was because it was forced to do so by the agreement with the TPLF that is signed and other factors. But otherwise, its preference always has been to deny aid to Tigray, to obstruct, at the report I mentioned outlines, to obstruct aid to Tigray. So if the humanitarian organizations did the obstruction for the regime, then the regime will be happy, of course. So why? I think they. I don't think they understand that it is in the Ethiopian regime's interest to for them to suspend aid to Tigray, because it has never been happy with the idea of delivering aid to Tigray, because they are sick people, the Ethiopian regime, and they believe that if Tigrayans got enough food, if everything was all right in Tigray, they would be organized, they would be politically active, they would demand for their rights, and that would be trouble for us. That's what they think. So if you are obstructing aid to Tigray, or if you are suspending operations in Tigray, the Ethiopian regime is going to welcome that development. But the assumption, I'm reading between the lines in the report, the assumption seems to be that USAID and WFP think that they are punishing the Ethiopian regime, and that the Ethiopian regime would expedite the investigation so that aid would soon resume to Tigray. But that is not going to happen. The Ethiopian regime is going to make sure that the investigation takes as long as possible, is as late as possible, so that Tigray continues to be deprived of aid. And I think that is a very, very important point that whether that is USAID or WFP should keep in mind, which I don't think they have taken into account. So those were the point that I wanted to make. I think there is a lot of the humanitarian organizations tend to take the Ethiopian regime at its own word, even though there is absolutely no reason for them to believe anything that the Ethiopian regime says, because the Ethiopian regime just lies for a living. And given that they have been working closely with it the past 3 years, you would expect them to know that it's lying, and to find ways to neutralize the Ethiopian regime. But you don't see that initiative, and you wonder why. And the other thing is, they should have a close look into their own people, into their own staffers in Ethiopia, and how they have been used by the Ethiopian regime, and how insofar as there has been massive scale humanitarian theft and misappropriation now, they should have seen it coming if they were careful, because we had been on a daily basis saying that this was going to happen, and that indeed it had been happening. Maybe the scale varies, but that is what had been happening for the past 3 years. And for them to have ignored all the evidence in front of them, and to now say that they are shocked that there has been misappropriation, is the shocking aspect to me. And thank you for the listen. And please, if you are new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to share it around with your friends and connections. And thank you for the listen. Today I have been Taklai, and bye bye.